Okay, hello guys, it's Rylan, and today we're going to read The Adventures of Captain Underpants, full color, the first epic novel by Dave Pilkey. Chapter 1, George and Harold. Meet George Beard and Harold Hutchins. George is the kid on the left with the tie and the flat top. Harold is the one on the right with the t-shirt and the bad haircut. Remember that now. George and Harold were best friends. They had a lot in common. They lived right next door to each other, and they were both in the same fourth grade class at Jerome Horwitz Elementary School. George and Harold were usually responsible kids. Whenever anything bad happened, George and Harold were usually responsible. But don't get the wrong idea about those two. George and Harold were actually very nice boys, no matter what. Everybody else thought they were good, sweet, and lovable. Well, okay, they weren't so sweet and lovable, but they were good nonetheless. It's just that George and Harold usually had a silly streak a mile long. Usually that silly streak was hard to control. Sometimes it got them into big trouble, and once it got them into big trouble. But before I have to tell you that story, I have to tell you this story. After a hard day of cracking jokes, pulling pranks, and causing mayhem at school, George and Harold liked to rush to the old treehouse in George's backyard. Inside the treehouse were two big old fluffy chairs, a table, a cupboard crammed with junk food, and a padlocked crate filled with pencils, pens, and stacks of paper. Now, Harold loved to draw, and George loved to make up stories. And together, the two boys spent hours and hours writing and drawing their very own comic books. Over the years, they had created hundreds of their own comics, starring dozens of their own superheroes. First, there was Dogman, then came Timmy the Talking Toilet, and who could forget the Amazing Cow Lady? But the all-time greatest superhero they ever made up had to be the amazing Captain Underpants. George came up with the idea. Most superheroes look like they're flying around in their underwear, he said. Well, this guy is actually flying around in underwear. The two boys laughed and laughed. Yeah, said Harold. He could fight with wedgie power. George and Harold spent entire afternoons writing and drawing the comic adventures of Captain Underpants. He was their coolest superhero ever! Luckily for the boys, the secretary at Jerome Horwitz Elementary School was much too busy to keep an eye on the copy machine. So whenever they got a chance, George and Harold would sneak into the office and run out several hundred copies of their latest Captain Underpants adventure. After school, they sold their homemade comics on the playground for 50 cents each. Chapter 3, The Adventures of Captain Underpants! Written by George Beard, cartoons by Harold Hutchins. Wait a second. Oh, never mind. The Really Cool Adventures of Captain Underpants, written by George Beard, drawn or illustrated by Harold Hutchins. It was a time of darkness and despair for planet Earth. Bad guys had taken over the streets, and all of the superheroes in the world were too old to fight evil. Hey! Then came along a new improved extra strength superhero. Tra-la-la! Look up in the sky, it's a bird, it's a plane, it's an egg salad sandwich. No way, I'm Captain Underpants. Captain Underpants was faster than a speeding waistband, more powerful than boxer shorts, and able to leap tall buildings without getting a wedgie. Tra-la-la! Night and day, Captain watched over the city. Night and day, Captain Underpants watched over the city, fighting for truth, justice, and all that is pre-shrunk and cottony. Meanwhile, at a nearby elementary school, turn the page. It was Stinky Taco Surprise Day at the cafeteria. Everybody hated it so much, they all threw it away. Then the cafeteria food came to life. I am the ineatable hunk. The monster ran around the school eating everything in sight. Munch. Help! The ineatable hunk just ate up 15 folding chairs and the gym teacher. Oh no, not folding chairs. This looks like a job for... Tra-la-la! Captain Underpants! Captain Underpants shot lots of underwear at the monster, but it didn't do any good. Zip, munch, munch. So Captain Underpants took off running. The inimitable hunk chased him. Grrr! Help! And chased him. Finally, the inimitable hunk got too tired and thirsty to chase Captain Underpants. How about a nice drink of water, boys? So the monster took a long drink from a shiny white bowl. Gulp, gulp. When suddenly, flush! Hooray for Captain Underpants! And so the inimitable hunk got flushed away and was never heard from again. Tra-la-la! The end. I like their comic. Don't miss our next exciting adventure, Captain Underpants and the Attack of the Talking Toilets. Coming soon to a playground near you. This is actually a true story. A real book. I know. Mean old Mr. Krupp. Do you see that old guy looking at the window up there? That's Mr. Krupp, the principal. Now, Mr. Krupp was the meanest, sourest old principal in the whole history of Jerome Orwitt's elementary school. He hated laughter and singing. He hated the sounds of children playing at recess. In fact, he hated children altogether. Do you know? And guess which two children Mr. Krupp hated most of all? Who do you think? Pause the video and say an answer. Wow, good answer. If you guessed George and Harold, you're right. Wow, you might be right. You might be wrong. But I hope you're right. Oh, sorry. Mr. Krupp hated George and Harold. He hated their pranks and their wisecracks. He hated their silly attitudes and their constant giggling, and he especially hated those awful Captain Underpants comic books. You can't do anything about it, Mr. Krupp. Sorry. You shouldn't, at least. I'm going to get those boys one day, Mr. Krupp vowed. One day, very, very soon. Chapter 5. One day, very, very soon. Remember when I said that George and Harold's silly streak got them into big, big trouble once? Well, this is a story of how that happened. And how some huge pranks and a little blackmail turned their principal into the coolest superhero of all time. It was the day of the big football game between the Horrocks Knuckleheads and the Steubenville Stink Bugs. The bleachers were filled with fans. Jerome Orowitz Elementary. See our big football game today. The cheerleaders ran into the field and shook their pom-poms. Over their heads. A fine black dust drifted out of their pom-poms and settled all around them. "Give me a K!" shouted the cheerleaders. "K!" repeated the fans. "Give me an N!" shouted the cheerleaders. "N!" repeated the fans. "Give me an achoo! Achoo!" repeated the fans. The cheerleaders sneezed and sneezed and sneezed some more. They couldn't stop sneezing. "Hey!" shouted a fan in the bleachers. "Somebody sprinkled black pepper into the cheerleaders' pom-poms." "I wonder who did that?" asked another fan. "Achoo! Achoo! Achoo!" The cheerleaders stumbled off the field, sneezing and dripping with mucus as the marching band members took their places. But when the band began to play, steady streams of bubbles began blowing out of their instruments. Bubbles were everywhere. Up and down the field, the marching band slipped and slid, leaving behind a tractor a thick trail of wet, bubbly foam. "Hey!" shouted a fan in the bleachers. "Somebody poured bubble bath into the marching band's instruments." "I wonder who did that?" asked another fan. Soon, the football teams took the field. The knuckleheads kicked the ball. Up went the ball. Higher and higher into the sky. Higher and higher it went. The ball sailed onto the clouds. Into the clouds and kept right on going until nobody could see it anymore. "Hey!" shouted a fan in the bleachers. "Somebody filled the game ball with helium." "I wonder who did that?" asked another fan. "Achoo! Achoo!" right over here. But the missing ball didn't make any difference because at that moment, the knuckleheads were rolling around the field, scratching and itching like crazy. "Hey!" shouted the coach. "Somebody replaced our deep-heating muscle rub lotion with Mr. Prankster's extra scratching itching cream." "We wonder who did that?" shouted the fans in the bleachers. The whole afternoon went on much the same way, with people shouting everything from "Hey! Somebody put sea monkeys in the lemonade!" Ugh, to "Hey! Somebody glued all the bathroom doors shut." Before long, most of the fans in the bleachers had gotten up and left. The big game had been forfeited, and everyone in the entire school was miserable. They changed the sign. Here, see? "Boy, our feet smell bad." Everyone, that is, except for two giggling boys crouching in the shadows beneath the bleachers. "Those were our best pranks yet," laughed Harold. "Yup," chuckled George. "I hope we won't get busted for this." "Don't worry," said George. "We covered our tracks really well. There's no way we'll get busted." Chapter 6. Busted. The next day at school, an announcement came over the loudspeakers. "George Beard and Harold Hutchins, please report to Principal Krupp's office at once." "Uh-oh," said Harold. "I don't like the sound of that." "Don't worry," said George. "They can't prove anything." George and Harold entered Principal Krupp's office and sat down on the chairs in front of his desk. The two boys had been in office together countless times before, but this time was different. Mr. Krupp was smiling. As long as George and Harold had known Mr. Krupp, they had never ever seen him smile. Mr. Krupp knew something. I didn't see you boys at the big game yesterday, said Mr. Krupp. Oh no, said George. We weren't feeling well. Yeah, Harold stammered nervously. We went home. Aw, that's too bad, said Principal Krupp. You boys missed a good game. George and Harold quickly glanced at each other, gulped, and tried hard not to look guilty. Lucky for you, I have a videotape. Oh, a videotape of the whole thing, said Mr. Krupp. He turned on the television in the corner and pressed the play button on the VCR. A black and white image appeared on the TV screen. It was an overhead shot of George and Harold sprinkling pepper onto the cheerleaders' pom-poms. Next came a shot of George and Harold pouring liquid bubble bath into the marching band's instruments. How do you like the pre-game show? Asked Mr. Krupp with a devilish grin. George eyed the television screen in terror. He couldn't answer. Harold's eyes were glued to the floor. He couldn't look. The tape went on, revealing all of George and Harold's behind-the-scenes antics. By now, both boys were eyeing the floor, squirming nervously and dripping with sweat. Mr. Krupp turned off the TV. You know, ever since you boys came to this school, it's been one prank after another. First, you dissected frogs in the Jell-O salad at the parent-teacher banquet. Then you made it snow in the cafeteria. Then you rigged all the intercoms so they played Weird Al Yankovic songs full blast for 6 hours straight. For 4 long years, you two have been running amok in this school. And I've never been able to prove anything until now. Mr. Krupp held the videotape in his hand. I took the liberty installing tiny video surveillance cameras all around the school. I knew I'd catch you two in the act one day. I just didn't know it would be so easy. Chapter 7. A Little Blackmail. Mr. Krupp sat back in his chair and chuckled to himself for a long, long time. Finally, George and Harold got up the courage to speak. What are you going to do with that tape? He said. Oh, I thought you'd never ask, said Mr. Krupp. Laughed Principal Krupp. I've thought long and hard about what to do with this tape, Mr. Krupp said. First, I thought I'd send copies to your parents. The boys swallowed hard and sank deeply into their chairs. Then I thought I might send a copy to the school board, Mr. Krupp continued. I could get you both expelled for this. The boys swallowed harder and sank deeper into their chairs. Finally, I came to a decision, Mr. Krupp continued. I think the football team would be very curious just who was responsible for yesterday's fiasco. I think I'll send a copy to them. I think George and Harold leaped out of their chairs and fell to their knees. No, cried George, you can't do that. They'll kill us. Yeah, begged Harold. They'll kill us every day for the rest of our lives. Mr. Krupp laughed and laughed. Please have mercy, the boys cried. We'll do anything. Anything? Asked Principal Krupp with delight. He reached onto his desk, pulled out a list of commands, and tossed it at the boys. If you don't want to be dead as long as you live, you'll follow these rules exactly. Exactly, 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 exactly. George and Harold carefully looked over the list. This is blackmail, said George. Call it what you like, said Principal Crep. But if you two don't follow that list exactly, then this take becomes the property of the Orwitz knuckleheads. Rules. No more practical jokes or pranks. 2. No laughing or smiling. 3. No more Captain Underpants. Wash my car every day. Mow my lawn. Chapter 9, Grime and Punishment. Chapter 8, Grime and Punishment. Did you know that that's actually the name of the 9th Dogman book? At 6 o'clock the next morning, George and Harold dragged themselves out of bed, walked over to Mr. Krupp's house, and began washing his car. Then, while Harold scrubbed the tires, George roamed around the yard pulling up all the weeds and crabgrass he could find. Afterward, they cleaned the gutters and washed all the windows on Mr. Krupp's house. At school, George and Harold sat up straight, listened carefully, and spoke only when spoken to. They didn't tell jokes. They did pull pranks. They didn't even smile. Their teacher kept pinching herself. I just know this is a dream, she said. At lunch, the two boys vacuumed Mr. Krupp's office, shined his shoes, and clipped his fingernails, and ironed his tie. At recess, they clipped his fingernails and ironed his tie. Each spare moment in the boys' daily schedule was spent catering to Mr. Krupp's every whim. After school, George and Harold mowed Mr. Krupp's lawn, tended his garden, and began painting the front of his house. At sunset, Mr. Krupp came outside and handed each boy a stack of books. Gentlemen, he said, I've asked both your teachers to give you extra homework. Now go home. Both extra homework. Now go home, study hard, and I'll see you back here at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. We've got a busy day ahead of us. Thank you, sir, moaned the two boys. George and Harold walked home dead tired. Man, this was the worst day of my entire life, said George. Don't worry, said Harold. We only have to do this for 8 more years. Then we can move away to some far-off land where they'll never find us. Maybe Antarctica. I've got a better idea, said George. Uh-oh. He took a piece of paper after his pocket and handed it to Harold. It was an old magazine for the 3D hypno ring. How's this going to help us? Asked Harold. All we have to do is hypnotize Mr. Krupp. We'll make him give us the video and forget this whole mess ever happened. That's a great idea, said Harold. And the best part is that we have to only wait 4 to 6 weeks for delivery. 4 to 6 weeks later. After 46 weeks of back-breaking labor, grueling homework assignments, and humiliating good behavior at school, a package arrived in George's mailbox. From the Little Wise Guy Novelty Company. It was a 3D hypno ring. Why is the box so big anyway? Whatever. It looks so big. Hallelujah, said George. It's everything I ever hoped for. Let me see, said Harold. Don't look directly at it, warned George. You don't want to get hypnotized, do you? Do you really think it'll work? asked Harold. Do you really think we can amaze our friends, control our enemies, and rule the world just like the ad says? It better work, said George, or else we just wasted 4 whole bucks. The next morning, George and Harold didn't arrive early at Mr. Krupp's house to wash his car and reshingle his roof. In fact, they were even a little late getting to school. When they finally showed up, Mr. Krupp was standing for them at the front door waiting for them. And boy, was he mad. Mr. Krupp escorted the boys into his office and slammed the door. All right, where were you two this morning? He growled. We wanted to come over to your house, said George, but we were too busy trying to figure out the secret of this ring. What ring? snapped Mr. Krupp. George held up his hand and showed the ring to Principal Krupp. It's got one of these weird patterns on it, said Harold. If you stare at it long enough, a picture appears. Well, hold it still, snarled Mr. Krupp. I can't see the darn thing. I've got to move it back and forth, said Harold, or else it won't work. Mr. Krupp's eyes followed the ring back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and back and forth. You have to stare deeper into the ring, said Harold. Deeper, deeper, deeper. You are getting sleepy, said George. Very sleepy. Mr. Krupp's eyelids began to droop. After a few minutes, Mr. Krupp's eyes were closed tight, and he began to snore. You are under a spell, said George. When I snap my fingers, you'll obey our every command. I will obey, mumbled Mr. Krupp. All right, said George. Have you still got that videotape of me and Harold? Yes, mumbled Mr. Krupp. Well, hand it over, bub, said George. George instructed. Mr. Krupp unlocked a large file cabinet and opened the bottom drawer. He reached in and handed George the videotape. George stuffed it into his backpack. Harold took a different video out of his backpack and put it into the file cabinet. What's that video? asked George. It's one of my sister's old Boomer the Purple Dragon sing-along videos. Nice touch, said George. When Harold bent down to close the cabinet, he took a quick look inside. Whoa, he cried. Look at all the stuff in here. Mr. Krupp had taken away. The file cabinet was filled with everything Mr. Krupp had taken away from the boys over the years. There were slingshots, whoopee cushions, skateboards, fake doggy doo-doo, you name it. It was in there. Look at this, cried George. A big stack of Captain Underpants comics. He's got every issue, said Harold. For hours, the two boys sat on the floor laughing and reading their comics. Finally, George looked up at the clock. Yikes! 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 He said, it's almost lunchtime. We better clean up this mess and get to class. The boys looked up at their principal, who had been standing behind them in a trance all morning. Gee, I almost forgot about Mr. Krupp, said Harold. What should we do with him? Do you want to have some fun? asked George. Why not? said Harold. I haven't had any fun in the last 4 to 6 weeks. Cool, said George. He walked up to Mr. Krupp and snapped his fingers. You are a chicken, he said. Suddenly, Mr. Krupp leaped onto the desk and flapped his arms. Clack, 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 he cried, kicking his papers off the desk behind him and pecking at his pen and pencil set. George and Harold howled with laughter. Let me try, said Harold. You are a monkey. You gotta snap your fingers, said George. Oh yeah, said Harold. You are a monkey. Suddenly, Mr. Krabs sprang off his desk and began swinging from the fluorescent light fixtures. Ooh, 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 he shrieked, leaping from one side of the room to the other. George and Harold laughed so hard they almost cried. My turn, said George. Let's see, what should we turn him into next? I know, Harold did, holding a Captain Underpants comic. Let's turn him into Captain Underpants. Good idea, said George. You are now the greatest superhero of all time. The amazing Captain Underpants! Mr. Krabs tore down the red curtain from his office window and tied it around his neck. Then he took off his shoes, socks, shirt, pants, and awful dookie. Tra-la-la! He sang. Mr. Krabs stood before them, looking quite triumphant, and his cape blowing in the breeze of the open window. George and Harold were dumbfounded. You know, said George, he kind of looks like Captain Underpants. Yeah, Harold replied. After a short silence, the two boys looked at each other and burst into laughter. George and Harold had never laughed so hard in all their lives. Tears ran down their faces as they rolled on the floor, shrieking in hysterics. After a while, George pulled himself from the floor for another look. Hey, George cried. Where'd he go? George and Harold dashed to the window and looked out. There, running across the parking lot, was a pudgy old guy in his underwear with a red cape flowing behind him. Tra-la-la! Mr. Krabs, come back! Shouted Harold. He won't answer to that, said George. Now he thinks he's Captain Underpants. He thinks he's Captain Underpants now. Oh no, said Harold. He's probably running off to fight crime, said George. Oh no, said Harold. We gotta stop him, said George. Oh no, cried Harold. No way. Look, he would get killed out there. Harold was unmoved. Or worse, said George. We would get into big trouble. You're right, said George. We've got to go after him. The two boys opened the bottom file cabinet drawer and took out their slingshots and skateboards. Do you think we should bring anything else? Asked Harold. Yeah, said George. Let's bring the fake doggy doo-doo. Good thinking, said George. You just never know when a fake doggy doo-doo is going to come in handy. Harold stuffed Mr. Krabs' clothes, shoes, and toupee into his backpack. Then together the two boys leaped out the window, slid down the flagpole, and took off on their skateboards after the amazing Captain Underpants. Now you can see your hands. George and Harold rode their skateboards all over town to look for Captain Underpants. I can't find him anywhere, said Harold. You'd think a guy like him would be easy to spot, said George. Then the boys turned a corner, and there he was. Captain Underpants was standing in front of a bank, looking quite heroic. Mr. Krabs, cried Harold. Shh, said George. Don't call him that. Call him Captain Underpants. Oh yeah, said Harold. And don't forget to snap your fingers, said George. Right, said Harold. Ring! But before he got a chance, the bank doors flew wide open and out stepped two robbers. The robbers took one look at Captain Underpants and stopped dead in their tracks. Surrender, said Captain Underpants, or else I would have to resort to wedgie power. Oh no, whispered George and Harold. Nobody moved for about 10 seconds. Finally, the robbers looked at each other and burst out laughing. They dropped in their loot and fell to the sidewalk screaming in hysterics. Almost immediately, the cops showed up and arrested the crooks. Let that be a lesson to you, cried Captain Underpants. Never underestimate the power of underwear. The police chief, looking quite angry, marched over to Captain Underpants. And who the heck are you supposed to be? The police chief demanded. Why, I'm Captain Underpants, the world's greatest superhero, said Captain Underpants. I fight for truth, justice, and all that is pre-shrunk and cocky. Oh yeah, shouted the police chief. Cuff him, boys. One of the cops took out his handcuff and grabbed Captain Underpants by the arm. Uh-oh, cried George. We gotta roll. Together, the two boys zoomed into the crowd, weaving in and out of cops and bannisters. Harold skated up to Captain Underpants and knocked the superhero off his feet. George caught him, and the boys skated away with Captain Underpants on their shoulders. Stop, cried the cops. But it was too late. George, Harold, and Captain Underpants were gone. Chapter 14, The Big Bang. After their quick escape, George, Harold, and Captain Underpants stopped in a deserted street corner to catch their breath. Oh, okay, said George. Let's dehypnotize him quick before something else kaboom happens. A huge explosion came from the rare crystal shell across the street. Heavy smoke poured out of the building. Suddenly, two robots with one stolen crystal emerged from the smoke and jumped into an old truck. Did I just see two robots get onto a truck? Asked Harold. You know, said George, up until now, this story was almost believable. Well, believable or not, said Harold, we're not getting involved. I repeat, we are not getting involved. Just then, Captain Underpants leaped. What did I just start to say? The princess. Just then, Captain Underpants leaped from the street corner and dashed in front of the truck. Stop, in the name of underwear, he cried. Uh-oh, said George. I think we're involved. The two robots started up the truck and swerved around Captain Underpants. Unfortunately, the truck brushed up against his red cape, and it got caught. With a mighty jerk, Captain Underpants flipped backward, and the truck was pulled him along as it drove away. The bad guys! Grab him! Cried George. The two boys skateboarded with all their might toward the speeding truck and grabbed Captain Underpants by the ankles. Help! They cried as the truck pulled them through the city streets. Mommy, said a little boy sitting on a bench. I just saw two robots driving in a truck. Driving a truck with the guy in his underwear hanging off the back of the red cape, pulling two boys and skateboards behind him with his feet. How could you expect me to believe such a ridiculous story?" asked his mother. Bus stop. Finally, the truck came to a screeching halt in front of an old abandoned warehouse. The sudden stop made Captain Underpants slip over the roof of the truck and crash through the front door of the building. "Well, well, well," said a strange voice from inside the warehouse. "It looks as if we have a visitor." George and Harold hid behind the truck until the coast was clear. Then they sneaked up to the hole in the door and peeked inside. Captain Underpants was all tied up. The two robots were standing guard, and a strange little man wearing a diaper was laughing maniacally. "I am the evil Dr. Diaper," the strange little man told Captain Underpants. And you will be the first to witness my takeover of the world." How many pages did we read? Did I actually read? Uh-oh, I almost lost it. Wait. Wow, that's a lot. I'm sorry to make loud noises. Heavy gears began shifting and spinning, and a laser beam from the crystal shot straight up through a hole in the roof. "In exactly 20 minutes, this laser beam will blow up the moon and send huge chunks of it crashing down upon every major city in the world," laughed Dr. Diaper. Then I will rise from the rubble and take over the planet." "Only one thing can help us now," said George. "What?" "Rubber doggy doo-doo," said George. Harold took the fake doggy doo-doo and slingshot from George's backpack. With careful and precise aim, George shot the rubber doo-doo through the air across the room. It landed with a plop right at the feet of Dr. Diaper. "Yes," whispered George and Harold. "Yes! Yes!" Plop! Dr. Diaper looked down at the doo-doo between his feet and turned bright red. "Oh dear me," he cried. "I'm dreadfully embarrassed. Please excuse me." He began to waddle to the restroom. "This has never happened to me before, I assure you," he said. "I guess with all the excitement, I just... Oh dear, oh dear." While Dr. Diaper was off changing himself, George and Harold sneaked into the old warehouse. Immediately, the robots detected the boys and began marching toward them. "Destroy the intruders," said the robots. "Destroy the intruders." George and Harold screamed and ran to the back of the warehouse. Luckily, George found 2 old boards and gave one of them to Harold. We are not going to have to resort incredibly graphic violence, are we?" said Harold. "I sure hope not." Warning! The following chapter contains graphic scenes showing 2 boys beating the tar out of a couple of robots. If you have high blood pressure or if you faint at the sight of motor oil, we strongly urge you to take better care of yourself and stop being such a baby. Flip-O-Rama! It'll actually look animated. Yeah, ha, ha, ha. Yee. The robots are mad. Now, George and Harold are going to hit the robots. At least George. Now, Harold returns the favor. Ha ha! mixed nuts and bolts. Whee! Harold, don't you think this is fun? Yeah, it is, George. Chapter 17. The Escape. After defeating the robots, George and Harold untied Captain Underpants. Come on, cried Harold. Let's get out of here. Wait, said Captain Underpants. We have to save the world first. So George, Harold, and Captain Underpants frantically looked all over the Lasermatic 2000, searching for a way to shut it down and stop the inevitable disaster. Said Harold, I think this might be the lever we want. He pulled the self-destruct button lever with all his might. Suddenly, the Lasermatic 2000 began to sputter and shake. The huge laser beam turned off, and pieces of the machine began flying off in all directions. It's gonna blow! Cried Harold. Run for your lives! Not so fast! Screamed Dr. Diaper, who had appeared out of nowhere. You demolished my robots, you destroyed my Lasermatic 2000, not yet really, and you ruined my one chance to take over the world. But you won't live to tell the tale, said Dr. Diaper. He pulled out his Diaper-matic 2000 ray gun and pointed it at George, Harold, and Captain Underpants. Captain Underpants quickly stretched a pair of underwear and shot it at Dr. Diaper. The underwear landed right on the evil doctor's head. Help! Cried Dr. Diaper. I can't see! I can't see! George and Harold ran out of the warehouse as fast as they could. Great shot, Captain Underpants. There's just one thing I don't understand, said George. Where'd you get that extra pair of underwear? What extra pair? Cried Captain Underpants. Where? Ugh. Yuck. He took it off himself secretly somehow and then covered that so that no one would see his private parts. Haha. Never mind that, cried George. Let's get out of here before that Lasermatic 2000 thing kaboom! Explodes. The Lasermatic 2000 blew up, tearing apart the old warehouse. It sent flaming shards of red-hot metal in every direction. Fire fell from the skies around our heroes, and the earth began to crumble beneath our feet. Oh no, cried Harold. We're doomed! To make a long story short, they got away. Chapter 19. Back to school. George, Harold, and Captain Underpants made a quick stop outside the police station. They tied Dr. Diaper to a lamppost and attached a note to him. There, said Captain Underpants. That ought to explain everything. Arrest me! Back in 15 minutes. Please don't commit any crimes till we return. Thank you. Then George and Harold led Captain Underpants back to Joram Orwitz Elementary School. Why are we going here? Asked Captain Underpants. Well, you've got to do some undercover work here, said said George, reaching into his backpack. Put these clothes on and make it snappy. Don't forget your hair, said George. Captain Underpants quickly got dressed behind some bushes. Well, how do I look? He asked. Pretty good, said George. Now try to look really mad. Captain Underpants made the nastiest face he could. You know, said Harold, he kind of looks like Mr. Krupp. Harold, whispered George, he is Mr. Krupp. Oh, yeah, said Harold. I almost forgot. Before long, they were all back inside Mr. Krupp's office. Said Harold. Let me see the instruction manual for that ring. said George. I think I lost it. You what? Cried Harold. The two boys searched frantically through the office, but the 3D hypnotic ring instruction manual is nowhere to be found. Never mind, said George. I have an idea. He removed the flowers from a large vase in the corner. Then he poured all of the water over Captain Underpants' head. What'd you do that for? Cried Harold. I saw him do this in a cartoon once, said George. It's gotta work. After a few minutes, Mr. Krupp slowly came to. What's going on in here? He demanded. And why am I all wet? George and Harold had never been so glad to see Mr. Krupp in all their lives. I'm so happy I could cry, said Harold. Well, you're gonna cry when I give that video tape to the football team, shouted Mr. Krupp. I've had it with you too. Principal Krupp took the videotape out of his file cabinet. Remember what happened? Wait. Was it? Yes. Here, see, they switched. So, maybe this isn't the right one. Principal Krupp to the videotape out of his file cabinet. You boys are dead meat, he sneered. He stormed out of his office with the video and headed toward the gym. George and Harold smiled. Wait till the football team sees that video, said Harold. Yeah, I'm sure they like singing Purple Dragons. Hey, look, said George. I found the 3 hypno ring instruction manual. It was in my shirt pocket, not my pants pocket. Well, throw that thing away, said Harold. I will never need it again. I shall hope not, said George. Warning. Whatever you Warning. Whatever you do not pour water in anybody's head when they are in a trance. This will cause the hypnotized person to slip back and forth from trance to reality whenever they hear the sound of fingers snapping. The end? La 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 la, we love Boomer, la la la. Things at Jerome Orwitz Elementary School were never quite the same after that fateful day. The football team enjoyed Mr. Krabs' video so much that they changed their name from the Knuckleheads to the Purple Dragon Sing-Along Friends. The name change didn't go over too well with the fans. But hey, who's going to argue with a bunch of linebackers? George and Harold went back to their old ways, pulling pranks, cracking jokes, and making new comic books. They had to keep an eye on Mr. Krupp, though, because for some strange reason, every time he heard the sound of fingers snapping, Principal Krupp turned back into, you know who? Oh no, said Harold. Here we go again, said George. Tra-la-la! The origin of Captain Underpants. You don't have to see this part. Dave Pilkey created Captain Underpants when he was 8 years old, which is my age right now. It all happened back in 1974 when Dave Pilkey was a second grader at St. John's Lutheran School in Elyria, Ohio. It might not surprise you to know that Dave Pilkey was the class clown back in the second grade. He was also the class artist. Whenever Dave got a chance, he would draw funny pictures to make his friends laugh. Dave also folded sheets of paper in half to make his own flip-o-ramas, which depicted ridiculous scenes of mayhem, which his friends called then flip actions. Like George and Harold, Dave Pilkey even made his own original comic books. All of these things were seen by great distractions, and James Cantankerous teacher, Miss Ribble, not her real name. This very teacher, however, who inadvertently gave Dave the idea for Captain Underpants. One day, Miss Ribble was talking to the class, and she happened to use the word underwear. Everyone in Dave's class immediately began to laugh. This irritated Dave's teacher, and she got very angry. She scolded the children, shouting, "Underwear is not funny!" This only made the class laugh even harder. At that moment, Dave Pilkey had an epiphany. He realized that underwear was a very powerful thing, and the mere mention of it could make everyone laugh. That day, Dave Pilkey drew his very first drawing of a caped hero named Captain Underpants. Dave's drawing was an immediate hit with his classmates. Miss Ribble, however, was not amused. She immediately tore up Dave's drawing and sent him out into the hallway. Zong! Dave Pilkey was no stranger to spending time in the hallway. In the second grade, Dave got banished to the hallway almost every day. Usually he spent his time sneaking up and down the corridors, changing the letter on the bulletin boards around so that they spelled out ridiculous things. Catch a fart! It wasn't long before Miss Ribble got lost to Dave's hallway and moved a spare desk out there so that he would stay put. Usually Dave just drew silly pictures while he sat on his hallway desk, but the day of his epiphany, he was inspired. He began making a comic book about his underwear-clad hero. Captain Underpants flew into action on the pages of Dave's story, defeating terrible monsters, rescuing innocent children, the world in crazy flip action scenes. Saving the world in crazy flip action scenes. When Dave was finally allowed back into the classroom, he brought his comic book in with him. It didn't take long before Captain Underpants' first adventure began causing outbursts of laughter and hysteria. Miss Ribble seized Dave's comics, ripped it up, and told him, "You'd better straighten up. You can't spend the rest of your life making silly books," she told him. Despite his teacher's admonishments, Dave Pilkey did indeed continue making silly books. In fact, Dave got his very first silly book published once he was still in college. After he graduated, Dave wrote and illustrated many more silly books about dogs. Cats, mice, dragons, and dumb bunnies. While he wasn't making books, Dave visited hundreds of schools and libraries and talked with children about his experiences as an author. Every time Dave spoke, he would draw a picture of Captain Underpants, which made the children laugh hysterically. At the end of his presentations, kids would always ask Dave the same question: "Are you ever going to make a book about Captain Underpants?" "I don't know," Dave would reply. "Do you think I should?" The answer was always a resounding roof-raising scream of "Yes!" So in 1996, Dave Pilkey began writing and drawing the book you are holding in your hands right now. you are listening to right now. Dave Pilkey will include much of his own childhood possible in this book. So he based George, where was I? George and Harold on himself like Dave. George, and Harold were class clowns and class artists. They make comics, they switch letters around on signs, and they are always getting in trouble with their teachers and principal for one thing and another. And of course, in their action, they are always presented in Fliporama. Fun facts. I'm not going to do those right now. The end. Please, I hope you like the book. Please subscribe to our channel.